You are what you eat. We've all heard this phrase countless times. It's been embedded in our minds since it first became popular back in the 1940s. Usually we take it as a gentle reminder to eat healthy, but it's deeper than that. The foods we choose aren't just shaping our bodies, but are actively changing our brains. New findings suggest there's one specific, often overlooked component in our diet that could profoundly impact memory, attention, and even brain structure itself. This nutrient is not technically needed to survive, but it's quite possibly the most important non essential nutrient for better health. Today on Daily Value, we'll explore how a seemingly simple dietary choice could hold the key to clearer thinking and sharper cognitive performance. Fiber might seem straightforward, roughage, bran flakes, something to keep digestion running smoothly. But dietary fiber, as we know it today, didn't even fully enter the scientific conversation until the 1950s. And it wasn't until the 1960s and 70s that the health promoting role of fiber began to get serious recognition. Today, dietary fiber is defined internationally by the Codex Alimentarius as carbohydrate polymers, essentially long chains of sugars that resist digestion in our small intestines. Notably, fiber isn't just a single substance. Instead, it's a diverse class of carbohydrates, each with unique chemical properties that determine distinct health outcomes. For instance, there are viscous fibers like beta glucans found in oats. Viscosity, by the way, refers to a fiber's capacity to expand when hydrated. Highly viscous fibers can actively reduce cholesterol. There are insoluble fibers such as cellulose from wheat bran, which are thought to add bulk to stool and aid digestive transit. It's important to note that the chemical properties of the different fiber types determine their impact on host health outcomes. There are certain fibers termed microbial accessible carbohydrates. These have a unique property. They're metabolized by gut bacteria. This fermentation drives relevant systemic effects impacting our health well beyond digestion, compared to up to 90% of fiber from fruits and vegetables, a fact that might explain some of the nuanced differences observed in health outcomes between dietary patterns. While the influence of dietary fiber on gut and metabolic health is well documented, researchers have recently turned their attention to another aspect: fiber's potential impact on cognitive function. Early data, particularly from animal studies, strongly suggest that diets deficient in fiber cause significant cognitive deficits, including impaired memory and reduced synaptic plasticity. These deficits were accompanied by increased inflammation in brain regions necessary for learning and memory, especially the hippocampus. Now, interestingly, although previous human studies hinted that higher fiber intake is associated with better mood and cognitive performance, research explicitly examining how dietary fiber influences brain structure in humans has been scarce. The limited data we do have suggests that dietary patterns richer in fiber may be associated with better overall brain integrity, including larger brain volumes and reduced white matter damage. Yet, not many previous human studies have systematically explored whether dietary fiber directly correlates with measurable structural differences in specific brain regions linked to memory, attention, and learning. That all is beginning to change. A study just published out of the University of South Carolina has finally begun to close this gap, probing the question of whether dietary fiber intake can literally reshape brain areas involved in cognition and memory. In other words, can fiber not just support your gut, but structurally enhance or preserve your brain? This was a cross sectional study that leveraged advanced neuroimaging techniques to explore how fiber intake affects the brain, specifically looking at gray matter volume in a sample of 190 healthy adults ranging from 20 to 79 years old. Now, measuring gray matter volume isn't straightforward, so researchers used a high level neuroimaging method that allowed the scientists to detect subtle changes in brain structure, changes that might seem minor but could indicate significant impacts on cognitive health and brain function. Specifically, the study examined the hippocampus and the parahippocampal gyrus, two key regions embedded deep within our temporal lobes. The hippocampus is essential for forming new memories and spatial navigation. Damage or shrinkage here is strongly associated with memory decline, cognitive impairment, and Alzheimer's disease. The parahippocampal gyrus works closely with the hippocampus, helping process contextual information and visual spatial memory, like recalling locations or navigating familiar right parahippocampal gyrus. Interestingly, they found associations between higher fiber intake and improved performance in attention and language tests, suggesting potential functional cognitive benefits beyond structural integrity alone. The researchers took it a step further, looking at whether there's an optimal level of fiber intake for brain health. They found what researchers sometimes call the Goldilocks effect, indicating that having too little fiber is detrimental, but having extremely high levels may not offer additional benefits. Specifically, participants with at least a moderate level of fiber intake, that was an index score around 1.74, according to their calculations, people consuming this much fiber showed notably higher hippocampal volume compared to individuals consuming very low or excessively high fiber amounts. Exactly how much fiber is that? Well, each participant's fiber index score reflects relative dietary fiber concentration across their diet, not an absolute amount. From this study and based on population intake data that's been corroborated a few times over, but we're going to go over fiber amount recommendations in just a little bit. We can infer that participants' maximum fiber-related neural protection was occurring somewhere between 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day. In simpler terms, these findings suggest that while fiber may generally help protect the hippocampus and supports cognitive function, there might be an ideal sweet spot, a certain level of fiber intake that provides maximal cognitive protection. Too little might leave your brain vulnerable, but significantly overshooting this range might not give you extra benefits, highlighting the importance of balanced dietary intake. These results build upon prior animal studies that showed clear deficits in cognitive function and hippocampal structure with fiber deficiency. It is also in alignment with past research in humans showing that fiber intake was tied to improved cognitive performance, including faster information processing and better working memory. But this new human data takes it further, demonstrating that dietary fiber doesn't just correlate with better cognition, it might actually reshape and structurally protect brain regions involved in memory and learning. So how exactly might fiber exert these protective effects? Well, that brings us to the next piece of this puzzle, the gut-brain axis. Now, we've established that fiber intake correlates with physical changes in brain regions critical for cognition, notably the hippocampus, but how does fiber exert this influence on brain structure and function? Well, when we think about fiber's effects on cognition, two broad categories emerge: mechanisms that rely on our gut microbiome and those that operate independently of it. As it goes for independent pathways, let's consider that fiber can directly influence our gut's lining, what is called the intestinal epithelium. Fiber interacts with these intestinal cells known as enterocytes, triggering signaling pathways that include AMP-activated protein kinase, or AMPK, epidermal growth factor receptors, and toll-like receptors. Through these pathways, dietary fiber supports the integrity of our gut barrier by promoting the formation of tight junction proteins and encouraging the growth and renewal of gut lining cells. Additionally, fiber regulates the immune system within the gut by modulating the release of signaling molecules that we call cytokines and chemokines. This has been shown to affect immune cells, including dendritic cells, macrophages, monocytes, and mast cells. This was first demonstrated in an animal study in which supplementation with resistant starch resulted in reduced macrophage expression in adipose tissue and improved insulin sensitivity. Macrophages are specialized immune cells. These microbiota-independent actions suggest that fiber could directly maintain gut health and lower systematic inflammation, potentially protecting the brain. Now, perhaps the most interesting and likely route through which fiber communicates with our brain involves gut bacteria, our microbiota. Microbes metabolize dietary fiber, particularly these forms that we've termed as microbial accessible carbohydrates, into potent signaling molecules. Chief among these are short-chain fatty acids like acetate, propionate, especially butyrate. Short-chain fatty acids don't just passively float around the gut. They actively interact with systems throughout the entire body. For instance, they help maintain intestinal and blood-brain barriers. Short-chain fatty acids strengthen gut barrier integrity, preventing harmful substances from entering circulation, and reinforce the blood-brain barrier, by increasing the expression of proteins like occludins. Short-chain fatty acids can reduce inflammation in the gut and body by interacting directly with immune cells. They also influence neurotransmitter production like serotonin, glutamate, and GABA, and enhance neurotrophic factors such as brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF as most of us know it. One of the most interesting mechanisms involves the vagus nerve, the primary communication line linking your gut to your brain. Fiber-induced short-chain fatty acids and beneficial microbes can activate vagal pathways affecting memory and emotional regulation directly. Gut bacteria and short-chain fatty acids stimulate gut hormone release. Hormones like glucagon-like peptide 1 or GLP-1, peptide YY, and ghrelin. These gut-derived hormones can cross the blood-brain barrier or signal through neural pathways, influencing brain functions linked to learning and memory. At first glance, these pathways might seem a little complex or dizzying, involving everything from immune cells and gut bacteria to neurotransmitters and hormones, but the message is reasonably straightforward. Dietary fiber impacts cognitive function, not just because of what it does in the gut, but because of how those effects ripple outward throughout layers of biological complexity, eventually reshaping and or helping maintain brain structure and function. In simple terms, when we eat fiber, we feed beneficial gut bacteria. Those bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids, which protect our gut lining, reduce inflammation, and communicate with our brains via hormones, nerve signals, and other biochemical pathways. Over time, these tiny molecular signals accumulate, possibly enhancing our mood, attention, and memory, and even physically shaping different brain regions. Much of the data in humans on this topic is observational. However, there was a randomized placebo-controlled trial published just last year that further supports the findings we've discussed to this point. This study was called the PROMOTE trial, a study designed specifically to assess whether targeting the gut microbiome could practically enhance cognitive function in older adults. What made this trial unique? Well, the PROMOTE trial used a design called twin pair randomization. This means they recruited pairs of twins aged 60 and older. Each twin within a pair was randomly assigned either a daily prebiotic fiber supplement or a placebo. Both twins followed the same physical activity and dietary regimen, so any observed differences could be attributed with greater confidence to the fiber itself, minimizing genetic and environmental confounding. Participants took a daily prebiotic supplement containing 7.5 grams of prebiotic fiber, specifically a mixture of inulin and fructooligosaccharides, also known as FOS, in an approximate. Participants took a daily prebiotic supplement containing 7.5 grams of prebiotic fiber, specifically a mixture of inulin and fructooligosaccharides, also known as FOS, in an approximate 50-50 ratio over the course of 12 weeks. The cognitive results were clear, and after 12 weeks, participants taking the prebiotic supplement demonstrated significant improvements in a specific memory test designed to measure visual memory and new learning abilities, skills that are among the first to decline in conditions like Alzheimer's disease. Improved scores indicated better memory function, suggesting that prebiotic supplementation could potentially play a role in supporting memory retention and learning even at an older age. This trial stands as proof of concept, opening doors for larger, more definitive studies, but the takeaway was promising. Altering your gut microbiota with fiber-rich prebiotics may be an effective, accessible approach for enhancing brain function and protecting cognition as we age. So what does this practically mean for you? The reality is most of us simply aren't getting enough dietary fiber. Current guidelines suggest consuming at least 14 grams of fiber for every 1,000 calories you eat. So for most adults, that's roughly between 28 to 35 grams of fiber per day. However, the most up-to-date data suggests that most adults are only consuming a maximum of 17 grams of fiber per day. When I say most adults, I mean between 90 and 95%. The most up-to-date studies on the matter may even suggest a need for a higher fiber intake recommendation to experience substantial health benefits and cognitive benefits. Research now points towards higher targets, maybe even closer to 50 grams per day, similar to what we see in populations from rural or non-industrialized regions where cognitive decline and chronic diseases are notably less common. But how do we practically achieve these fiber goals? Well, to start, it helps to understand that not all fiber is created equal. Different types of fiber offer different benefits. First, there's soluble fiber, which forms a gel like substance in the gut and can help manage cholesterol and lower blood sugar levels. This is the kind of fiber that is 70 to 90% accessible by gut microbes. Good sources of soluble fiber include oats, barley, beans, apples, berries, citrus fruits, carrots, and psyllium husk. There's also insoluble fiber, which doesn't dissolve in water, but instead helps move food through your digestive system. You'll find insoluble fiber in whole grains like wheat bran, nuts, seeds, legumes, potatoes, and many green vegetables. Approximately 30% of these fibers are accessible to gut microbes. Finally, there are more defined prebiotic fibers. These are especially interesting because they directly nourish beneficial gut bacteria and help support the gut brain connection we've been discussing today. Prebiotics are abundant in foods such as garlic, onions, leeks, asparagus, bananas, artichokes, and so on. You can also find them as supplements containing inulin or fructooligosaccharides. Again, those are often called FOS. These are highly fermentable fibers, which is in part what makes them so beneficial. But on the flip side, some people can experience GI distress with highly fermentable fibers. The research is still evolving, but one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Targeting dietary fiber intake could be a promising strategy for promoting brain health and possibly even slowing the progression of neurodegenerative conditions. While we've seen associations between fiber intake and improved memory, attention, and brain structure, it's important to recognize that dietary interventions do not act in isolation. The benefits observed in high fiber diets may also stem from other nutrients typically found in those foods: polyphenols, unsaturated fatty acids, vitamins, and antioxidants. It's nearly impossible to separate these things completely, but fiber, especially fermentable types like inulin and pectins, they stand out for their ability to consistently modulate the gut microbiota, generate neuroactive metabolites, and influence systemic inflammation and even neurotransmission. And that's what makes it such an interesting and accessible target. Fiber isn't a supplement reserved for clinical settings. It's a fundamental component of everyday foods. Small changes to your plate can deliver real physiological signals to your brain over time. This doesn't mean that you need to count grams obsessively. It means thinking about fiber as more than just roughage. Think of it as a cognitive nutrient, a daily investment in your long-term mental clarity, memory, and resilience. So whether you're choosing oats over pastries, adding lentils to your salad, or simply including an extra serving of vegetables at dinner, these aren't just gut healthy choices, they're brain smart decisions as well. Thank you for joining me today on Daily Value. If you found this interesting or useful, share it with someone who's still underestimating their bowl of beans and berries. Until then, eat well and stay sharp.